this paper. Number one, the most important thing you can do on this paper is to have a
Thesis.
thesis. Yes, you remembered. I love it. Okay, you must have a thesis. Okay? The thesis is what you want to prove. What do you want to prove about your story? All right? Every one of your stories has characters, has a setting, but for the most part, that is not going to be anything you want to prove. All right? In your stories, what is this thing you want to get across? What is the argument you want to make? All right? You got
The
one?
moral of the story. What is the underlying?
You can use it as the moral. You can even use something that's recurring. We were talking on break. Many years ago, one of the papers I had worked on was the use of a specific element, in the case of that book was water, to show a religious connotation throughout the story. And it was really interesting that this author tried to actually use water to show likeness of this character in the book to Christ. So he was trying to include a religious undertone of the book, but it was sort of hidden. And so you can talk about a specific literary element that you want to prove being used in your story. You can use the moral of the story as what it's being proven. You can take just one aspect of your story. Now, if you're going to take one aspect, spend a little time telling me what the story is about. But what is the whole point you want to prove is your thesis statement. I want to prove to you this, all right? A thesis is you're going to convince me of something. So thesis, you're going to tell me what it is you're going to convince me of, okay? You want to have, now, it doesn't have to be 3, although the human brain accepts things in numbers of 3. That's why most of your pastors keep it to 3 points. All of a sudden, you have the pastor who has it to 7 points, and you walk out there and you can't remember the first 4. Why? Because you're like, he gave you too much. He needs to clump them better into groups of 3. Can you have 2? You can. Can you have 4? You can. You get to 7, rearrange it so that you're actually clumping things carefully together. So you're going to have argument 1, argument 2, and argument 3. All right? So the thesis is going to be what you want to prove by 1, 2, and 3. All right? You want to prove, let's say it's the moral of the story. All right? You might, anyone doing Tom Sawyer? Anyone doing, so Tom Sawyer, okay. So your story would be, what's the moral of your story for Adventures of Tom Sawyer?
I think there are many things, but the thing I picked up most is like the boy, the life of a boy,
Okay.
and doing crazy things and facing the consequences, and like a Christian, we know what's right and wrong, but we do sometimes the wrong things, and we can't get away with the consequences.
Yes, but Tom Sawyer is interesting. Mark Twain, the author, or Samuel Clemens, is a realist. So he's actually a perfect one to talk about in today's lesson, because Tom Sawyer is going to sort of show the not-so-pretty side of things. As we're coming out of realism, romanticism, we're going to talk about this a little bit, we enter a phase called realism. And he's going to use some fun way to do it, because nobody wants to read just a miserable book. Tom Sawyer is a funny book. However, it's going to show some reality. It's going to be a big reality check. And so if you're doing Tom Sawyer, you might want to talk about the moral of what's being shown. Right? It's going to now shed some light on how an entire people group is treated in the South, in the deep South. And,
That's
right. I can get away with that. My husband's from South Carolina. He can turn on that. He can turn on that accent. And so your thesis is going to be that you maybe want to talk about how discrimination is played out in Tom Sawyer and then you would use 3 aspects of the story. All right, how does Tom react in this situation? How does other people treat his friend when things are going on? Like you'll use specific situations to build your argument. A paper at this level is building an argument. All right, a paper at this level is going to try to prove something, not just telling me what something is, This is this. It's not an informative paper. It's not an informative speech. It is trying to prove me a point now. All right. Argument 1, argument 2, and argument 3. What you're going to do on each one is you're going to say, in your thesis, you're going to give me an introduction, first of all. Introduction. You can start with a quote. Since this is a literary analysis, you may begin with a quote from the book. You may talk about a statistic if you really like, but you're going to get something to grab my attention in the introduction. The very last sentence of the introduction is the thesis. That's where it belongs. The very last sentence of the introduction is the thesis. That's where it belongs. If you ever want to know where to put your thesis so that your professor will always find it, you always put it at the last sentence of the introduction. That's where your professor knows where to look for it. So when it's not clear what your thesis is, they'll go, here, let me go find it right here. This is where it belongs. If you don't put it there, they're going to have to hunt, especially if yours is vague. So make sure that when you're making your point, that's where you're going to put it. Then in your thesis, you're going to describe what you want to prove, by points 1, 2, and 3. This is one sentence. You don't give me a paragraph for a thesis. A thesis is almost always one sentence. Then your next paragraph. Your next paragraph is, how do you prove this point by argument 1? So you're going to prove that point with argument 1. You're going to give me examples of what happened in the story to prove your point, just in that one type of example. Then you're going to do it again in argument 2. You're going to do it again in argument 3. During each one of these arguments, you're going to be able to talk about everything from how the characters interacted, you can talk about symbolism. You can talk about motif and structure plot devices. Once you have done all of these things, you're going to go to a conclusion. Your conclusion is going to do one very important thing. What is it? Restate the thesis. You're going to go back and you're going to take the thesis. You're not going to say it exactly the same way. Rework it a little bit. And you're going to tell me how you proved your point. You're going to claim victory over this paper in the last paragraph. If you don't claim victory, somebody else must have won.
Ooh.
Okay? So the thesis is where you claim victory. It's where you stake your flag at the top of the mountain. I want you to imagine that your paper is Everest. And if you climb that sucker and don't plant the flag, you weren't really there. Okay?
So that's a lot on that.
What's important, though, is if you didn't take the flag with you, that's up here. You can't plant it at the end. You put the thesis down here, it doesn't count unless it was up here. You got to say, I'm going to battle, and now I won. Got it? Okay. So now, you can talk about characters, setting, plot motif, devices, imagery, all of these things. You can take quotes from it. How long should a quote be? Not too long. Pick the most important parts. The most important thing, other than having a thesis, is what in a paper? It's pivotal between an A and an F. It's so easy to slide you from one to the other so very fast. What is it?
Make sure you quote.
Thank you! Quotation marks. And cite your sources. You don't use those quotation marks and it becomes what?
Plagiarism.
Plagiarism. And that's the automatic 0.
She taught me well last
I really hate giving those, don't I, Angela?
Yes.
It makes me crazy almost.
Yes.
Yes.
We don't want to see that.
No, we don't. All right, so when you go to quote something from your book or from another source about your book, you must use those beautiful little quotation marks and cite your source. Can you use other sources? Of course you can. It's wonderful to get to use other sources. You want to use websites? Go for it. You want to use other pieces of literature? Have a ball.
Wait, I thought you said we couldn't use websites.
Yeah, you can use websites.
Okay.
Okay.
Because apparently you said we couldn't. You said we had to
No,
use
no,
books.
no, okay,
As long as you
I
properly
went to
cite.
library.
On
As
our
long as you
syllabus?
properly cite it.
No, on our syllabus you said we couldn't.
I don't think I wrote that.
Okay. Well, then maybe I misread. Okay,
Just listen now.
just discriminate
Just
me.
listen now.
No. You had to actually read stories. No. That was for the paper?
I'm done talking.
For the paper, I believe you can use sources. You can use sources. However, here's what I didn't want you to do. I don't want you reading. I don't want you to read only the thing online that tells you about the book and not the actual book. So, if you've read your book, have a ball. Have fun. Okay? No, you can, of course, use sources.
So we have to put the quotation, but the source only in the end.
Okay, the source goes in two places.
Okay.
Okay.
The same page. Okay.
The source goes in two places.
Mhm.
All right. Now, we got this? We're good?
Yeah, we're good.
Excellent. All right. A quick thing on how to cite sources for me so that we get all of our points. I love people getting all of their good grades. All right, ready? To be or not to be, that is the question. Quotation, quotation. The comma goes where? Inside the quotation marks. It's very important. Blah, 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 comma, quotation marks. You put it on the outside of this, points off. Okay? So inside the quotation marks. Now you have to do a very funny little thing. You put a little number 1 at the top here. This is going to tie in at the very bottom of your page. There's going to be another little 1. And this is called a footnote. Why? Because the feet are on the bottom of the person, and this footnote goes on the bottom of the page. Here, you're going to write your where you got it from. Okay? So here is a number. Do not, please do not do this. Put parentheses with a million little things about where you got it, when you got it, and the URL of what website you got it from. That makes me crazy.
How much it costs?
Why? Because that is like driving with a brand new 15-year-old teenager. You're reading a great paper, and all of a sudden you make a left turn without putting the brake on. All right? That is that moment. You're riding with the teenager, and they go, and they stop, and they go, and they stop, and all of a sudden you had whiplash, and you never went over 15 miles an hour. All right? That is what happens if you put a parentheses or parenthetical citation in the middle of a paper. This is Turabian format. Turabian format is you write and you write and you write and you follow the flow of the paper. And if I want to check to make sure you are accurate to your source, I look at the bottom of the paper and there you go. And I can keep reading here. So we do not put this here. We put the number 1 here. It automatically will pop up at the bottom of the page, and you will put where you got it from. All right, you got it from Shakespeare. All right, and your information down here. This same information, even more so with more detail, will go at the very end of your paper on the very last page. Where does that belong?
At the end for reference.
Bibliography.
Oh, bibliography.
Your bibliography, or your works cited page. That is where you're going to tell me exactly where you got it from, so that I can literally follow your steps to find out your words and how you got it. Okay? This is vital to your A. I'll say it one more time. This is vital to your A. Okay. Don't scare you. No. This is for your comfort to know that this will help you. If you quote more than 5 lines, you're going to block quote it. You know what a block quote is? A block quote is you're going to indent, and all of a sudden, instead of double spacing, you're all going to be single spaced, and it's indented in. All right? But even on a block quote, at the end of the block quote, you're going to put a little footnote marker on there, and you're going to come down here and tell me where you got it. Any questions there? All right, excellent.
If you have more than one passage from the same source, we change the number, it should be number 2, 3, or?
You don't have to do the number, the computer's going to do the number for you.
Indent each side.
The computer will actually take care of the number for you. Anytime you put insert footnote, it'll just go to number 2, it'll go to number 3, it'll just keep going.
Repeat this.
Right, and it's for any source. It's for any source in the entire paper. All right, next. What else do you need to do to be great on this paper? 2, don't just tell me what happened in the story. Analyze it. Come on, we can do this. We've been doing this all semester long. You're going to discuss with me that point you want to make. You're going to say, is there imagery? Or is it just stark? Is it straightforward? Did the author use humor? Did he romanticize something? Was there something kept popping up, that the same symbol over and over and over again that happened every time something was getting ready to occur? What happened in the story that let you know, you know what I mean? That moment of foreshadowing that Jaws is about ready to appear. Is there something in your story that let you know what was about to happen? What kind of foreshadowing took place that gave you those clues? Could you already tell at the beginning of the story what was going to happen at the end? Was it that predictable? And what made it predictable? Was it like your regular chick flick where you sit for 5 minutes and you're like, that guy's going to end up with her, she's going to get dumped, and she's going to be miserable, and he's going to move to LA, right? Was it that predictable? Or was there some sort of plot twist that threw you around and made you rethink everything you thought beforehand? Was there any type of discrimination in the story? Who was the bad guy, and why did they make him the bad guy? Was it because he was really evil, or was it because the author had a certain type of context? We talked today about how the context shifted from the time of Shakespeare during the Renaissance, all of a sudden to the Romantic era. We talked about the anti-Semitic shift there. Interesting. So start thinking about why the author wrote what he or she did. All these things will help make an A paper. Okay, give me context. Context is king, even in literature.